Welcome to my podcast. Today we're going to talk about In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. We're going to do a plot analysis. So the genre was nonfiction. It's a true story, and it's about a family who was murdered in Holcomb, Kansas by two men, Perry and Dick, in 1957. We go through and we learn how and why they were killed through different perspectives. And we see these transitions seamlessly, and Truman does a really great job of this, between switching from what's happening in the criminals and Dick and Perry's life and going back to the investigation. And we go through what are they doing before the murders and what are they doing after, and how does it happen, and we go through many different perspectives throughout it, and it helps to add depth and detail and context while also building the story. And it helps to seamlessly move in between, so we know what's happening at the same time, to make it less confusing. So some of the main characters are Dick and Perry. And so Perry grew up really poor, really bad childhood, had an abusive mom. She was drunk. His father was really not great either. He lost two siblings to suicide because of their trauma, because of what they had been through as kids, and his very little connections with his living family members. Even his sister at the time says that she's afraid of him, and when the police contact her to ask questions about him, she tells them that they can't tell him her location or her address because she's too afraid of him coming to see her, because she knows what he's done. She knows that he's committed crimes and stuff. And so he was kicked out of Kansas and told to never come back after some of the crimes he committed. And he comes back to see an old friend from prison later, and that's how he ends up back in Kansas and ends up committing the murders. And his friend that he met in prison, Dick, heard about this family, the Clutters, that were rich. And so Perry's plan was to go, he's either going to go see his friend or he's going to go with Dick, and he's going to go rob these people. And so Dick's childhood wasn't as poor as Perry's, and he grew up with a fairly normal childhood. His parents think the best of him. The entire time that people were questioning them, they were always saying that there's no way, it can't be him, it has to be Perry. There's no way that he could have done such a thing. He doesn't do that stuff, even though they knew what he had done in the past and the crimes that he had committed. They constantly defend him. He's also very manipulative throughout it. He manipulates Perry throughout most of the novel, and he has a tendency to manipulate children. He blames the crime on Perry and will do anything to save himself. Multiple times in the story, when he is questioned, he blames the murders on Perry, even when we don't know who truly did it. We always see that he never stands up for Perry. It's always him for himself. Many times we see him think about leaving Perry and just leaving and letting him go and just dropping him off and never coming back, and leaving Perry alone and hopeless. And if he's found, then he's found, and Dick doesn't care. He has some very pedophilic behaviors and has a tendency to prey on young girls and women. And there's a few times during the novel where Perry stands in between them. And this causes anger for Perry from Dick. But this causes anger from Perry because Perry he knows what it feels like to be the little person and to not be able to be stood up for and to go through it and not be able to do anything about it. So when he went to prison and he heard about the Clutters and how rich they were, he was motivated to commit the crime and get rich, and he just needed someone to do it with him. They were never planning on killing anybody, but that's kind of how they ended up. They went in and they couldn't find the safe, and when that happened, they had no other choice. They couldn't have any witnesses. So some literary techniques that Truman uses a lot. One of them is rhetorical parallelism, which is when we see the same scenario over and over, but from different perspectives and different details added. So he gives the reader more information and helps the story to progress as we learn about it. So some examples of this are when we first go through the crime, We know that they're gonna die, but we don't know how. We don't know anything about that. And Bobby, Nancy, one of Mr. Clutter's daughter's boyfriend, is at the home, and we know that he leaves and there's a car outside waiting outside their home. And then we know that shots are heard, but we know nothing else. And then we go through later and we see, as the investigators go through the crime scene, and we see that the Clutters were shot in the head, and they were all tied up, all four of them, the two children and the two parents. We know that there's two living kids, and that they were shown some type of mercy, because Nancy, the daughter's head was propped up on a pillow. So why would they do that if they show some kind of mercy and some type of kindness towards Clutters? And with the same thing with Mr. Clutter, he's put on a mattress box, instead of laying him on the cold ground. And it shows some type of mercy, and that slowly starts to key in, and that ends up being a detail that they kind of focus on throughout the novel as it becomes important. And then we go through again, and we see, we go through the perspective through the criminal Dick and Perry's eyes, and we see it as, yes, they went in, this is how they went into the house, they went into the house at this time, and they were looking for the safe, and they couldn't find the safe, and so they freaked out, and someone was up at the stairs, so they saw them. So they knew that they had been caught, and they went down this, and they went to see it, and the people were scared, and they tied them up, and this is what happened. And they tied them up, etc. They made sure that they couldn't speak. And it was very clear that Perry knew how to deal with knots, and so that was also another clue that led them to find the murderers. To find them. And then we go through another time, and we see that during this crime, Perry was the one to slit Mr. Clutter's throat. And this ends up being an issue, because it ends up being a key detail, because we were trying to figure out who was the one that actually murdered them, especially with two different stories from Dick and Perry. And Dick's primarily blaming it on Perry, while we see other things. We see that he was not fully there. He zoned out, and that could have been from his ultimate trauma as a child. And we see that one of the reasons that Dick wanted to go into the home in the first place was because he knew there was a young girl, and he planned to sexually assault her. And so that is also a key thing that we learn. And so they go through it multiple times, and this really helps to build suspense and a detail, even with an already detail full book filled with detail. It helps to add more to it. So I would say that is the basis of the plot, and that is my analysis of it. I feel like he did a great job with his literary techniques to build the suspense and with different things, and the characters are very deep, and even though they're true, he put a lot of work into it, so I think that's pretty great.